Welcome to everyone who joining us today for our winter Sustainable Development Goal Roundtable. This is a quarterly program that's been going on for a number of years, where we follow activities in the state of Minnesota that are working on all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And we use this as the opportunity to find out how we can connect with each other. We put an emphasis on that Sustainable Development Goal number 17, partnerships. And today we're joined by a very special team that's going to be talking about something that's the only one in the country. Anna Wasescha, who is the president and CEO of West Central Initiative, who you'll be meeting soon, and you'll be hearing more about West Central Initiative. She's been one of the key leaders in the country using the Sustainable Development Goals to help guide economic development, in this case in greater Minnesota in a rural area, and also to use those Sustainable Development Goals as kind of a North Star, as a way to see where we want to go in terms of making our whole societies more sustainable, more resilient going forward. Today's program is organized by Global Minnesota. We're proud to be part of the broader SDG Roundtable here in the state, and we're always looking for ways to promote how we can connect our work in Minnesota with the world, and how we can partner with others around the world to help us achieve our shared values. Our mission is advancing international understanding and engagement. And in this way, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are really adopted by all countries for the planet, are kind of a perfect mechanism for sharing best practices and for assisting or partnering with each other to reach these goals. We do public seminars. And so tomorrow, for example, we'll be looking at the Arctic. There's a great powers competition in the Arctic, and we'll have a very special speaker, Heather Conley, who'll be looking at the geopolitics of the Arctic. You can get more information about that at the Global Minnesota website. To all of you who are tuning in from around the planet, welcome to Minnesota. For all of you that are in Minnesota, stay inside, stay warm. And for all of you who are members of Global Minnesota, thank you so much for your membership. That's the financial support that makes it possible for us to put on programs like this and others. If you're not a member or you'd like to find out more, you can just go to our website, Global Minnesota, and thank you for your support, for being here today, and for caring about and being part of the global movement to reach those Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So I want to ask our lead speaker, Anna Wasescha, to join me here on the platform. Anna, welcome to the Sustainable Development Roundtable, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate the invitation to participate in the roundtable and to talk about some of the work we've been doing related to the Sustainable Development Goals. I also am grateful that my two colleagues are here with me today. Jill Amundson, who is our innovation strategist at West Central Initiative. She works a lot with planning and data, and Reid Peterson, who is identified, I think on the slide, as a former college intern at West Central Initiative, but I think he's actually come back to work for us a little bit part-time because in the process of the work he did last summer, which we'll talk about momentarily, he became quite an expert in how you map the organizations and nonprofits in our region who are working on the SDGs. I do want to sort of give a shout out to the importance of working with college interns. We have enjoyed every moment with Reid. Most of the colleges and universities that I know across the state of Minnesota have student organizations or initiatives out of their president's offices, or actually sustainability officers on campus. And this is the generation that we know will be most impacted by climate change. So if those of you who are listening today are thinking about how you can extend your work and do a little bit more, I would really encourage you to think about reaching out to colleges and universities, and they don't need to be local. Reid has been doing all of this work for us. We're out here on the west side of Minnesota from Duluth and from the Twin Cities. So now, because of COVID, we've learned we don't need to be in the same place to collaborate on really important projects. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to do some context setting about West Central Initiative, and then I'm going to pass it off to Jill, who I think will, she can go any direction she wants, but one of the things she'll be talking about is how we kind of introduce this to the group of stakeholders that we work with in West Central Minnesota. And then finally, we'll hand it off to Reid, who's going to show us how this movement map works. So as a context setting about our organization, West Central Initiative is one of the 6 initiative foundations that McKnight created in the 1980s to respond to the farm crisis in our part of the state and the mining and timber crises in the northern part of Minnesota. We cover all of greater Minnesota except, or all of Minnesota except the counties that make up the metropolitan area. Some of us would say we're not totally rural. I would say our region is largely rural, but we do have the twin sister Moorhead that is twins with Fargo. So we have a metropolitan area in our region. We make grants and loans. One of the things that, and we offer programs. And one of the things that's unusual about West Central Initiative is that we're a regional development organization for the same 9 counties as we are the Initiative Foundation. So we are the only one like that in Minnesota. And that gives us a special kind of span of attention. So we think a lot about planning and data and moving communities forward. And we also make these grants and loans to help that happen. It was the culmination of our strategic planning process a couple of years ago, where we decided to fully integrate those 2 sides of our organization. And that is how we got to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we were trying to understand what are the qualities of life as it's lived currently in West Central Minnesota, and then imagine forward into the kinds of lives and communities and experiences that we hoped for in our region. And when we came to the Sustainable Development Goals, we kind of immediately recognized them as sometimes I think of it as Esperanto. It's Esperanto, right? It's the language that it crosses all languages. And so the planning and the philanthropy is completely within the embrace of the SDGs. It's just, for us, it's a really good visual for our work. In order, and so I would say, and Jill is going to show the picture of this. So in order for us to kind of understand how this is all related, we put these concentric circles together. So the West Central Initiative Strategic Plan focuses on investing in local, reimagining regional, which is very important in a global and technologically driven economy. And then educate, activate, celebrate. But you'll see in the sort of orange circle, the develop MN cornerstones of economic development. And those are the 4 things that the regional development commissions in greater Minnesota all focus on. And all of the work falls within those categories. And then the SDGs surround it. So that's a picture and a vision for what we wanted to be, what our North Star would be for West Central Initiative. But we, of course, obviously had to start to take actions to make that real. And one of the first things we did was take a trip, a large contingent of ours. So there were 5 board members and 6 staff who went to the biennial Canadian Community Foundation Conference in Victoria, British Columbia, June of 2019. It was a very good experience for many reasons, but probably the foremost is that the Canadians in general as a nation and also in their sector of community foundations have totally embraced the Sustainable Development Goals. So we went to a number of workshops where we learned a lot about how they were seeing this both as a vision and in practical terms. And one of those was a presentation by the British Columbia Council on International Cooperation, BCCIC. And they had started a mapping project, and they demonstrated it, and we're going to show it to you in just a moment. And the whole purpose that they felt was being served by mapping nonprofit organizations, they call them civil society organizations, who are pulling in the direction of progress on the goals, would be to reveal to everyone that this work has been going on for a very long time. But there's an invisible brocade of it. It's a fabric that's woven of different organizations all over, in their case, British Columbia, but they're mapping most of Canada. And so it builds bonds and, of course, achieves the 17th of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is forging partnerships, because these are incredibly ambitious goals, and no one organization or governmental unit would ever be able to achieve them. So we all have to work together. So they demonstrated this, and we went up and talked to them, and we talked to them multiple times once we got back to Minnesota, and they were very eager to work with us to put us on their map, and we are now on their map, and we are going to be showing you what that looks like, and then of course we'll be on our own map as well. And I hope if any of you are intrigued by this, that you'll give some consideration to getting your organizations on the map. But let me just sort of also do some additional context setting. Of course, you have to, first of all, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals have got 169 targets and 231 unique indicators. So it's one thing to have your heart swell with a verve about wanting sustainable cities and communities, but it's another thing to actually say, well, what does that really look like? I mean, how would you know it if you actually had that? And so the methodology that the BCCIC used was to work with 169 indicators, or I'm sorry, 169 targets, not indicators. So that's part of the methodology. Another part of it is that we mapped nonprofit organizations as they did. They did civil society organizations. It's the same concept. They're thinking about how to map governmental organizations. And when they get to that point and they have a methodology developed for that, we will probably adopt it so we can expand the scope of what we have on our map. Reid will be able to tell you quite a lot more about that, but I do want you to know that we selected the nonprofit organizations who are in our database, so 600 plus organizations. We worked with publicly available information, and we used the mechanism that BCCIC developed, and they did theirs with the University of British Columbia, another good reason to be connected to your local universities and colleges. And so they were working with website and information and a lot with the mission statements of organizations to decide which of the targets the work falls into. I guess I want to say about that in conclusion that it's good to have some humility, I think, when you set about achieving a vision that is really so incredibly critical and urgent and ambitious, because you've got to take little bites out of the elephant in order to get there. So this is one bite. And in the future, in the near future, we hope by the beginning of the next fiscal year in July, we will have a dashboard for our region, our 9 counties, and there's a portion of White Earth Nation that is in Becker County, which is in our region. So we will have some measurements that are completely local to where we are, and then we'll be able to track progress over time. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, with some humility, it's another way to do it. And I could tell you a lot more, I guess, but I don't want to because I want to move this on to Jill and Reid. They got some great things to talk to you about. But of course, there's quite a lot to say about how a community foundation, regional development organization can work within the SDGs and do really powerful, important work in their communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill.
So Anna mentioned the vision and the first bites, and so I'm going to just give you a picture in your mind about how we introduced this to our stakeholders. We started with our board of directors and our economic development district board, which is representative of nonprofits, business organizations, and elected officials. And so we wanted to bring them that graphic that we showed earlier. I'll put it back on the screen. So they're used to looking at the work we do inside that green circle and looking at also our economy in that orange circle of those 4 cornerstones. We then brought them all to World Cafe style event, had people from across the region sitting across from each other looking at the 17 development goals. So if you can envision in your head a big conference room, this was back when we were allowed to be in one, and all 17 goals around the room, and people sat at tables and talked about organizations local to them doing work on the ground in their backyard, as it were, that affected these 17 goals. And in the 2 hours we sat around those tables, we had instant collaboration. People across geographies were talking about the great work that other people nearby them were doing. And it was kind of that Minnesota humble brag of, you wouldn't believe this great organization in my community and what they're doing around hunger or what they're doing around gender equity. It was a really exciting process. And we want to replicate that virtually with this map. And after Reid through with his presentation, I may give you a brief demonstration of the dashboard that we have established right now. And so Samantha and I, a coworker of mine, met with the BCCIC group and talked about the intricacies of mapping, which Reid will go into. And we immediately knew that 2 of us would never be able to do the 500 organizations as well as our full-time jobs. So as Anna mentioned earlier, we were very excited to be able to have Reid work with us, re-energize that work, and really see our region in a new way. And with that, I'll turn it over to Reid.
Hello, everyone. Joe, do you have those? Yep. Perfect. Wonderful. All right. My name is Reid Peterson. My official title was SDG intern. So kind of the no ins and outs of what SDGs mean for our area, and really just the methodology all behind it. You know, how can we think about SDGs in our local communities? And there we begin. So just a quick introduction about who I am. I'm a college student, as was mentioned, and I go to the College of St. Scholastica, which is right behind me. Also, the image on your screen, which is in Duluth, Minnesota, which is right on Lake Superior. So a wonderful a place to call home for these 4 years. I'm a senior student, and I'll be graduating this spring with a BS in biochemistry, and as well as a minor in political science. And really, you know, I find the passion in the connection of these disciplines of what does sustainable science look like in policy, you know, and bring those together and finding, you know, where that can lead. And so, as mentioned, I spent roughly 4 months this last summer working with West Central Initiative, or WCI, virtually from home. So it was a great position, as, you know, being, you know, with COVID, you know, everywhere, I could just stay at home and not have to travel to Fergus Falls. I could just be right at home. So this was a position that was great to be flexible and malleable, and kind of, you know, see how I want to take it in terms of the methodology sections of it. And then this last winter break between semesters, I was able to spend another month with WCI, focusing on data analysis and taking in more of the dashboard ideas that we'll get to later. So, you know, what exactly is this movement map that we're talking about? You know, that BCCIC, that British Columbia group, kind of, you know, first brought to light. And essentially, you know, the real purpose is to just reveal, in a way, you know, that invisible mosaic, right? That there's thousands of organizations that, you know, they're working hard and every day. And, you know, essentially what we're doing is just bringing them to light, right? And, you know, that, you know, what we're doing is essentially just allowing for a platform or a pedestal to allow these nonprofits to be visible for everyone, for them themselves and for the public, to create this transparent and inclusive space where nonprofits can connect with each other and with those around the world. And so there's a couple benefits of the map. The next slide. There it is. Okay. And so we find that there's 3 main kind of benefits that we can take away with implementing a movement map into our communities. And the first one, it just enables that transparency among organizations themselves and this national and global movement. And so, among themselves, nonprofits can benefit from just recognizing the fact that they're not alone. None of us are alone in this process. Not one organization, nonprofit, can fix poverty, can fix hunger. So, creating communities where there's a global interconnectedness of nonprofit organizations. And there's a really cool feature that we'll see on the movement map later, which allows you to, if I'm a nonprofit working for, creating a more gender inclusive community, I'm able to see, who exactly, around the world is working on the exact same target, the exact same goal as I am, which, just hopefully induces a sense of dialogue, of purpose, of creating, hey, sending an email and saying, hey, what's working with you, or a meeting, and what's not working in your community? How can we create, together these spaces in our community that's unique, but also similar in that sense that there's, we're all trying to fight against how we can make these goals part of our lives. And so creating just that dialogue of space is one way that this map can enhance that aspect. Additionally, the map can increase just essentially just the public awareness. What's going on with these SDGs that we hear about in the United Nations, and especially when you hear the UN, you think this big awesome group that's working on all these things, but in reality, a lot of it's right here in our communities. Bringing it back down, bringing the focus down into where are these in my life. And so it's important to emphasize, to the greater community, that we're not starting from scratch, right? That we're not recreating the wheel. We're just creating this platform to allow these nonprofits to just emerge. And additionally, and I would say most importantly, it's just a wonderful resource for allowing members in your community who are most vulnerable to seek out nonprofit support and assistance. And this is a way to do that, where if you go to the map, which we will, you can see every nonprofit thus far on there, their contact information, their location, their email, website. So it's just a way to connect people to assistance in nonprofit work that's very valuable. And then finally, another benefit is, there we go. Another benefit is just establishing a political statement in a way that reveals just essentially just the size and scope of the work that nonprofits are doing. And so it emphasizes, to our local and our state and federal elected officials and public institutions and agencies, what policies need to be addressed, what policies need to be prioritized. If there's, especially in American culture and society, nonprofits are really, in American idea sense, nonprofits are at the core of volunteerism and are found to be much more responsible for providing basic human services that governmental bodies kind of lack to offer when compared to other nations around the world. So the map really has a potential to reveal just how large of a size and scope American societies and governments rely on the work of nonprofits. And so then that's where we get to, what do these goals look like? So when it comes down to, really what is the nitty-gritty methodology of, assigning SDGs and targets, it comes down to first, understanding what these goals are really about, these 17 goals. And essentially, they are the blueprint of trying to achieve a more and better sustainable future for all. They address global challenges, local challenges that all of our communities face, including those in poverty to inequality to climate justice to economic stability. Across the board, it's a very comprehensive list. And so in terms of the methodology part, what you realize is that these goals are completely interconnected. You can't have one without the other. And so when it comes down to, I was given a list, part of my job of based on our database at WCI of all the nonprofits that we are under our list. And so I had no personal connection to these nonprofits. And so, I had to ask myself, when assigning a certain nonprofit with a goal, one of these 17, there are certain metrics that you have to build in a methodology sense. And it came down to, what metrics is this nonprofit most concerned with, and how does the nonprofit measure their success? What are they trying to measure, and how do they know when they've reached that success of, when they are, doing their work day in and day out? And again, so for example, if I'm a organization focusing on goal number 13, climate action, right? You can't not address water with climate, right? So, there goes goal 6 and goal 14. Okay, now we have to address water. Well, you can't not talk about good health and well-being. Goal 3, that's part of climate, and then even, environmental justice in goal 10. So everything is all together. So, you can't just say, all right, all 17 goals are in this one nonprofit. You have to really be, take a step back and focus on, where does my organization fit in this global community? I can't take, every bite. I have to take, my bite in my community, and really, pinpoint where exactly you fall on this map. And so when I was, doing this process, I found that most nonprofits ranged from 1 to 3 goals. So you want to get down to about 1 to 3 that your nonprofit, is really trying to focus on in terms of where they find success or what they deem as successful. And so what makes it even more complicated is that behind each of these goals, as Anna mentioned, there's layers. There's layers of subcategories, which we call targets. And so these targets, though, however, establish a range, and it's based on the impact that particular organization plans to tackle. And so, this creates an even more complicated and implicit system of how do we want to classify a target or a broad SDG goal, and then a more specific target to that organization. And one important thing to recognize is that, the entire world is using the same platform, the same software, or, potentially everyone can be using the same software, which we're finding that more nations are adopting this kind of platform, or in this specific one that the BCCIC adopted. And so, you have to ask yourself that, the mechanisms that, if you take, for example, SDG number 1, no poverty, the mechanisms that global institutions and nonprofits are using for eradicating poverty is going to look extremely different if you go to Germany, to Hong Kong, to Fergus Falls, Minnesota, where, WCI is headquartered. So, realizing that, where am I on that line in terms of the global community, that's the real challenge. And finding how all of these are all interconnected and layered. That's another challenge. So there's a link on the bottom that we're going to explore. I think I'll share my screen for that one. So when you pull up that link, which is attached to this slide deck, this is kind of the image that you first are introduced to, and where, as you can see, it's by Canada, and you can just start exploring. And so immediately you get the map of the world, and pinpoints start appearing all around the world. We see some in Europe, some in Africa. If I can scroll, sorry if it's a little glitchy. And we see the most of SDG, most nonprofits added to the list in Canada, based because it is a Canadian organization. And we get to begin, exploring, where, what nations are adopting this platform, and what necessarily they look like. And so if you get your hands on this website, which is a public website, that's just map.bccic.ca. It's great. This is the system and platform in which they've put in place. And so if you go to the top right, you'll see the little spinning arrow of the colors, and you're able to see, what is the movement map? What are SDGs exactly? Who is the BCCIC? And then some tips and tricks of how to create, add an organization to this map, in which I spent most of my summer, all of my summer doing actually, which was fantastic. And so on the left of that, you're able to go to this kind of spider web figure, and it's, add an organization. So this is where you would actually input your information, data entry into their system, in which once submitted, it would go to the BCCIC's approval process, where they have in place, and then they would contact you again if they want you to edit things or whatnot like that. So, but in terms of just where we're here, you can add your personal name of who's adding it, the organization name, the description, what's usually a mission statement of some sort, your purpose, metrics that you measure for success, and then the actual selection process of the SDG and associated targets. And so, say I'm, a group focusing on life on land and climate action, so I'm able to press as many as I want, and they all would appear below me. And so if we just focus on these two, goal 13 and 15 for now, you can see that each one has a scroll option. So the 15 is, goal 15, SDG 15, and then the point number is the target. And this is where the targets establish this range of impact. Are we looking, if on goal 13.1, are we looking to just, address all climate issues and disasters? I mean, that's a huge goal, or for poverty, for example, are we looking for eradicating extreme poverty? I mean, that's a huge goal. And then that's where the self-reflection part comes in of, is my organization responsible for extreme poverty and tackling that, or something more appropriate, which can be assessed with the goal, the targets below. So once you pick, and this is also an interesting process of, deciding, and you also can choose more than one, so you can use control button to, to pick, okay, these are the ones that, that are most associated with my group. And if this is it, if this is the ones you want to do, you can, continue next page. And then this is where you can kind of continue the final steps of adding an organization, including, location, where it's located, country, zip code. And I would say the most important parts is, including that phone number, the website, the email, making sure that you are putting in that you're allowing public users or other nonprofits to be able to contact you and find ways to create that dialogue and create those connections of how we can help each other. This is not just an individual sense. This is how we can help each other together throughout this worldly process of creating a more sustainable world. And then finally, the last two bits is the focus region of kind of where in the world are you focusing in, and then the specific country. And so, like, as an example, I can give an example of kind of the difficulties behind this part. Is one example was that I had a hard time with was churches. Where do we put churches in this list of SDG work, of nonprofit work, and what goal would you put under, what targets? Because there's our churches, how do they measure success? Is it based on membership? Is it based on spiritual enrichment? Is it based on being able to send people, members of the church to other places in the world to support other nations? There's many layers to that, and how we determine what is their primary goal, and is their primary goal associated with an SDG. And I had many conversations with members of the BCCIC's deciding process of how they accept their approval process, how they accept new organizations who are added to the list, and I mentioned that difficulty, and they came back with, well, in Canada, I mean, we usually have all these systems in place. We don't necessarily rely on churches for food banks or those things. It's not as common, I would say, or the amount of donations given to churches isn't as common in terms of what American culture is surrounded by churches in that area. So it's a really complicated system of how do we look at where these nonprofits fit in a global sense, in a sense that's not just in your backyard, but really expansively across the world. And so once you get to some more features, you can go to on the left, a filter search. And so we're able to put in, let's in the bottom here, geographic location. Let's go to the United States, and let's go to Minnesota. And so we press show. We're able to see on the top left that there are 571 organizations I'm proudly responsible for putting into the Minnesota map, mostly surrounding on the West Central Minnesota region, where I focused. And part of here, you're able to see where you can start looking into these organizations of what are they trying to get at, what's their metrics, what's their SDG, what's their target, how can I contact them. So say I go to let's go to Fargo. So if you go to the Fargo region, you're able to zoom in. I apologize again if it's a little glitchy, but I'll try to be a little slower. So if we go to, you can press a nonprofit, for example, West Central Minnesota Continuum of Care, the COC. You're able to see, the city in which it's located, its description, what it's trying to get at, preventing and ending homelessness. You're able to see right away that they're focusing on SDG number 1. And immediately right below that, you're able to get all their contact information, phone number, email, a website, where they're located. And so this was all work that I had to figure out quickly that, it's, especially in rural parts of Minnesota, a lot of organizations were very small, very, hometown things. So if I had to, double check, is this phone number work for your organization? It'll be on this public site and whatnot. And, that was a challenge too, is how, there's a system, I believe that the BCCIC is putting in place of of going through their submitted nonprofits and making sure that their phone's up to date, their email's up to date, and the website's up to date, and that they're still around doing good work. And so you're able to scroll around. I really recommend just taking time just to view other, what's out there. And I have to probably read. Yeah. So it's just a really cool site to just keep exploring and see what other places are doing, other nonprofits are working on. And on the left, again, you can go to, on the bottom, this is their profile page, their focus countries, which is what we looked at earlier, that they're focused mainly in the United States or solely in the United States. Their SDG targets. And so in this sense, they are ranked at a 1.2. And so this is what I put them at. And this is what it was approved by the BCCIC. And then specifically, you're able to get, what exactly does a 1.2 rating mean? If you go back to adding a new nonprofit to the list, you're able to see, what that tackles. And in this sense, I can show you all. If you go to no poverty, number 1 is eradicating extreme poverty. Number 2 is reducing poverty by at least 50%. And so that correlates with their mission statement. I remember calling them and having that conversation about, what do they plan to tackle and how much impact are they trying to get at, and then that is presented by the more fine description of what does a 1.2 SDG target look like. And then I would say one of the coolest settings on this page is similar groups. So now you're able to look up and see all these connections of, okay, so the work I'm doing in West Central Minnesota continuum of care, what other groups are specifically working on SDG target 1.2, and how are they trying to work out things, and what's working for them? How can I learn from them, or they learn from me, and have those conversations? And that's what this map really really fosters, that conversation, which is needed, especially in our time of COVID, where those conversations are happening a lot less. I mean, at my university, I can't just pop into my professor's office and have that conversation. It's meetings, it's Zooms, it's all that whatnot. So from there, I will stop sharing this and go back to my other screen, other presentation screen, and then finish that out. Okay, so a couple of things that I wanted to take away based on reflecting on my position, but also of mapping and that methodology, but also behind hopefully what you take away home from the idea of creating and participating in this mapping process. And that's the idea of one of them can be is the importance of advocacy and transparency. And just the idea that the map really reveals this umbrella of meaningful nonprofit work. It really just comes to light, that the idea that, what a great resource, for, to inspire yourself and others to go to your local city councilor, go to your state or federal elected official and show them that, this is a great way to create more equitable and sustainable communities. Additionally, it's a way to think globally and act locally, right? I mean, this is just what the idea of how these 17 goals can be reflected, by the UN, but also in our own lives, and what a meaningful process that is for us. And finally, just the idea that there's more work to be done, right? The mapping process opens more doors into ways for us to volunteer, to connect with others. And it allows us to realize, where there are areas in our communities that need the most attention, that need the most support, based on SDGs that are lacking in certain areas. If I'm noticing that there's not a lot of climate change SDGs in this area, maybe we need to advocate for that or support that with our elected officials or politicians. And finally, it's an extremely humbling process to see that Minnesota nonprofits are, the most represented on the map of in the U.S. sense. And I'd love to see, that to just blossom and bloom up and more, and also into across the U.S. and just to show the world that the U.S. really cares about our nonprofits, and that there's work that is being done to create more sustainable cities. And so next, just a couple of dashboard images, or images and tables and charts that could contribute to this dashboard idea of how we want to present ourselves and measure growth, and measure, how well are we as nonprofits, as a society, as a government, addressing certain issues. And this one, they can go from food insecurity, and see how there's areas to always progress. Also addresses race and income, and how we want to further that issue, as well as our unemployment rate, and that's a much larger timeline of sense. And overall, it just gives us a way to really measure our success, which is the whole purpose of this, right? Of how we can create more sustainable cities. And so with that, I think I'll leave it with whoever's next.
Well, I might be next. So I want to thank you, Reid. That was just a great presentation, and invite anyone who's watching this YouTube video to explore that map, because it's just filled with information. And reminds me, I was thinking about the Oracle of Delphi, who's admonition to us was know thyself. And that's exactly what that map helps us to do, is to know what we're actually already doing, and then build those connections. So Mark, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, Anna, Reid, Jill, thank you for both tackling this big idea. And of course, thank you to our Canadian friends for helping to inspire and guide. And Reid, it feels like you must have made some very close friends in this process. But our goal today is kind of letting people know this exists, showing some of the benefits of mapping per se, that, you know, it doesn't just say you can go from here to there. It says all these other things. And I think Reid was a fabulous explainer of how that works. But it also seems like this is now being used by West Central Initiative to guide decisions on budget, on staffing, on programs. Anna, can you give us a sense of how you're turning mapping into your strategic direction to change and improve the lives of people in your region of the state?
Sure. There are probably a lot of different ways to answer that question, but let me just say that because of COVID, the federal government has provided the regional development commissions. We're a regional development organization simply because we are not part of that statutorily defined system, but we do the same work. So the federal government has provided us with funding to hire 2 additional planners whose job it is to work with communities to develop systems and plans to be sustainable. And I think that's so critically important, because it signals that even on a federal level, and certainly now with the Biden administration, where we're talking about a whole of government approach to climate change, that the kinds of mega systems that guide our progress in this country are using language like sustainability and resiliency. So we are definitely working in that regard on issues that we see. For example, let's just take food systems and food insecurity and local food production, and that whole kind of access to land and the reviving the countryside, revitalizing the countryside. We're going to be working a lot, and we are currently working in that area deeply and more deeply. With the, as a foundation, we give grants out, and we have focused our grant giving. The first focus, and most of Minnesota's foundations jumped into this immediately, was COVID response and relief. But now it's like build back better, to invoke the Biden administration motto, and so we're giving grants to support sustainable development growth work, for example, clean energy. And there's quite a lot of really amazing work going on in this part of the state in that regard, a lot of it emanating from the University of Minnesota Morris and the community of Morris. And then the other is diversity, equity, and inclusion work, the community organizations who are either led by or serving BIPOC communities. We're trying to help strengthen them so that they can be resilient and help shape the next generation of leaders in rural Minnesota. So, and that, I mean, that was another piece about the SDGs. I have to say, when really it was through your work, Mark, that I became aware of the SDGs. But when you begin to think about the philosophical underpinning, which is no one is left behind, everybody's involved. The wealthiest people in the world are involved. They have a role to play with reaching these ambitious 2030 goals. By the way, this is the decade for action. Time's wasting. It's not looking good. We gotta redouble our efforts and reinvest every resource we can manage to identify in this work in order to just head off the kind of most disruptive impacts of climate change. But so this nobody's left behind is an equalizer. It's a great equalizer. We're all human beings on this planet. We share this planet together. There's no planet B. This is the one we've got, and every single person can have a role to play in that. And I feel like this is it's a moment that is kind of transformative for rural Minnesota and for greater Minnesota, where you think, well, you're kind of disconnected from the world. No, we are 100% connected, just like everybody else on the planet, and we can really make a difference. So West Central Initiative can work on the planning piece, the convening, the teaching the vocabulary and reinforcing that vocabulary and establishing the paradigm so that people go, they can recognize it too. They can look at something that they might have seen in one way initially, and it's like, oh, but now I see it this way. Now I understand why it's part of the movement towards sustainability. So
I've been very impressed by how all of you kind of took to using this geospatial or GIS systems. I mean, I use my phone to sort of get me from here to there, but you used that same technology to begin to say, well, here's where and here's where, and the relationship between those things give us information that inspire us, or they alarm us, or they help us to move. I know that some of that software comes from a company that's origins were at University of Minnesota many, many years ago, when a young person training to be an architect fell in love with geography, and the company eventually was called ESRI, ESRI. I know viewers can go to their website and see a lot of these tools and how those tools are being mobilized by communities all over, but also they're making them available in this COVID period for people to really use. So I know that you were developing a kind of new muscle for your community, and I can imagine that you'll use that muscle for a lot of other things. For example, understanding where your companies have strengths, where they are contributing to the SDGs. Where's your transportation system, your volunteer connective system? Any new ideas? I know you're moving the dashboards, other ideas of using that geospatial GIS kind of tools in your work in your region?
If I can, Anna.
Please.
Anna mentioned our grant giving as part of the philanthropic work that WCI does, addressed the SDGs. We were able to use the ESRI tool. I'm trying to pull it up rather quickly. I apologize, it might take me a moment, to map not only where those grantees were located, but the geography in which they served, so that anyone across the region could see how our dollars were affecting those SDGs by a map.
Fabulous. So people could feel some ownership, or they probably think of them somewhat as, how this is changing our community. And you can make that as affirming and also as descriptive of gaps or things that are needed. And this is I was thinking about how COVID, because it affected everybody, but everybody has a different station in life, so the impact was different. It's one thing about the SDGs, because it's everybody's responsibility. I know I work a lot on SDG 3, health and wellness. We want to bring a World's Fair on health and wellness here, and all of that. But there's SDG 3.6, which is reducing road fatalities and injuries by half. So that's one I focus on a lot. And I remember when the CEO of Cargill within the company banned cell phone use and distracted driving during the day in their company, at night if it's a phone, and then helped advocate for the law about distracted driving at the state legislature. And the statisticians could say precisely how many lives were saved by that decision. So there are ways that, some of these things are complicated and they have to take a lot of angles, but some of them can be as specific as reducing car crashes in half, and we can tackle that lots of different ways. So I so appreciate how you've incorporated these objectives into this work. You've got this map up, Jill.
I do. So this is normally how people talk about the grants that we receive, is where the money went by their address. But we specifically asked for service areas. So these two were about sustainable climate change, climate action, work going on in the region. The other was about equitable race equity, gender equity, things like that. But if you, we also mapped the service area. So you can see by grantee who's serving, excuse me, takes me just a minute to remember how to do things. Specifically, who's doing work in that county. You can see how those things overlap. And then those grantees have an opportunity to connect to each other. This is what we're doing right now. How can we pair with what you are doing to make the best impact?
Fabulous. And seems like somebody who was at the station of the 911 call or the 51, you know, that there's an information flow then that allows that kind of connectivity to then build on itself. And you can take it into the county supervisors and say, hey, here's an area over here. Mm-hmm. This is not happening. Or God forbid, but a clinic closes or the hospital services close or something like that. And all of a sudden, boom, you can show the impact in that way. So today's been an inspiring way to see how, you know, a process can unfold. What's your advice? You know, I don't know, between 400 and 500 people who get this big mailing list, the Minnesota SDG Roundtable. It's all kinds of people, all kinds of places. You know, some of us are just on our own. Some of us are in large companies. Some of us are in a government agency. But you've been putting your finger on sort of meta notions of transparency, of impact, of connectivity. What kind of advice do you have for all of us walking away from this webinar today, thinking about this great work going on up at Fergus? Darn it, Fergus Falls is ahead of us again. How do we catch up with them? What would you tell that person?
Well, we do like to celebrate community pride, but I would say, you know, if anybody would like to work with us, boy, we would love to work with you. I mean, that's the beauty of the network you've built here, Mark. And just as we learned so much from the Canadians, and they were so friendly and so willing to work with us, and we would love to work with anyone and just sort of pass it forward, pay it forward. And also, you know, we can put Minnesota on the map. We can say, you know, like this is powerful information. You know, we can learn from it and we can build on it. And the other thing is it kind of fuses technology, right? The Esri mapping system and all of the, you know, all of the data that's available on the World Wide Web. So it's technology and globalization, and it's all around climate change. So what could be more important than that? So yeah, we're here. We'd love to work with anybody.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Reid. Thank you, Anna. Thank you all who are watching. And thanks again to our members who make this possible. Of course, you can email us at Global Minnesota, or you can reach Anna up at West Central. And stay tuned. We'll be diving into another part of this process and this bigger picture coming up in our next quarterly Minnesota SDG Roundtable. Thank you again, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.